Hey class, today we're going to look at simplifying square roots and then higher order roots as well. So quick reminder, a square root is when you have a number that you multiply times itself, and that gives you the radicand, so the number inside the square root. And just a note that a lot of people forget about or don't know, our answer can be positive or negative when we take the square root of something. So here's an example. Square root of 25 is plus or minus 5, meaning that 5 times 5 equals positive 25, and also negative 5 times negative 5 equals positive 25 as well. So square root of 64 equals plus or minus 8. So this plus or minus is really important because it gives us a full answer, whereas if I only had given 8, that's only half of the answer. I'd like you guys to tell me, what is the square root of 16? Okay, we can find the square root of a fraction. So if I have square root of 4/9, I can take the square root of the numerator and the denominator, and both 4 and 9 are perfect squares, so I get an answer of plus or minus 2/3. Here's an example, square root of negative 36. So we said our answers could have both positive and negative solutions, but here we have a square root that's negative. So we have to ask ourselves, what number can I multiply times itself to give me a negative number, a negative 36? Well, if I think positive times positive, that's positive, and negative times negative is also positive. Therefore, in order to get a negative number, I would have to multiply a positive and a negative. And therefore, we don't satisfy the definition of a square root because we're not multiplying the same number times itself. Therefore, anytime you have a square root with a negative radicand, so the inside is negative, we have no real solution. All right, we're also going to look at something called the cube root. So the cube root looks like this. Instead of square root, we have a little 3 on the outside. And the cube root, we have to ask ourselves, what do we multiply by itself 3 times to get the number inside our radical? So here's a couple really common cube roots that I would like you guys to make sure you know. The cube root of 8 is 2, because 2 times 2 times 2 gives me 8. Similarly, the cube root of 27 gives me 3, because 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. I'd like you guys to try to figure out, what is the cube root of 64? All right, just a few more examples. Here we have the cube root of negative 8, and when we had the square root of a negative number earlier, we said there was no real solution. But here you see that I told you the cube root of negative 8 is negative 2. That's because we're multiplying negative 2 times itself 3 times. So negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. And then 4 times negative 2 gives me negative 8. Here's another common radical. The 4th root of 81 gives us 3, because 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. 27 times 3 is where we get 81. And finally, we come back to a root of a negative number. And this one is no real solution. So there's been a pattern. When it was square root, we had no real solution to a negative radicand. When it was cube root, we did get a solution, and now we're back to 4th root and we have no real solution. So the pattern, or the little trick, is whenever this little number out here, we call that the index. When the index is odd, you will have a solution. When the index is even, we have no real solution, because this index tells us how many times we multiply. And if you multiply times a number times itself an even number of times, you won't get a negative number. One last rule is fractional exponents. So we have this, what I called an index earlier. The nth root of b can be rewritten as b to the 1 over n power. So 216 to the 1/3 is the exact same thing as the cube root of 216. And the cube root of 216 is 6. Likewise, the cube root, negative 27 to the 1/3 power is the same as the cube root of negative 27. So this fractional exponent can be transformed into a radical. Here we have negative 256 to the 1/4 power. We can rewrite that as the 4th root of negative 256. And I'd like you guys to answer that or simplify this radical.